Yeah, the question is how organized versus spontaneous was the Boston Tea Party. And this is really difficult to know because, again, people don't start coming out with their stories until 50 years later. I think there's elements of spontaneity, but that there was a core, I think there was probably a core group, this is all speculation, and it is based on some written evidence, but I think there was a core group of guys that knew what they had to do, and they knew what the deadline was going to be, because the Dartmouth comes into harbor in November 28th, and then there was this rule that if your dutied cargo wasn't unloaded in 20 days, then the British Customs Service had the right to come in and seize the ship. And so they knew that that was about to happen the next day, basically on December 17th, if they didn't do something about it. So they were trying to come up with a way to not have the Tea Party. They were trying to just peacefully send the tea back to London, but the governor wouldn't let them do it. And so that's the final straw, is that Francis Roche, the owner of the Dartmouth, he comes back from Milton. He's walked 7 miles in both directions, and he's exhausted, and it's been raining, and he comes into the Old South Meeting House, which still exists, you can see it, and he says, nope, the governor wouldn't let me send my ship back. And he was up the creek. He's just trying to sell whale oil, and he doesn't want to lose his whole ship. He would have been financially devastated, So he's not really that much in sympathy with the Americans, but he's trying to cooperate with these guys. And he's like, I'm sorry. So that's when Samuel Adams famously says, then there's nothing more we can do to save the country. And so the meeting is, then winds down and nothing interesting really happens after that. But meanwhile, the Mohawks suddenly kind of come in and they start whooping, and then they march everybody down to the harbor, and this takes place. So there's definitely had to have been some advanced planning, and there's some evidence that the craftsmen themselves got together and said, this is what we're going to do. There's some evidence that they took their cues from wealthier merchants and politically connected guys. The really politically well-connected people like Samuel Adams, they very ostentatiously stay behind in the Old South Meeting House so that they can't be blamed while the Tea Party is happening. So what's clear is that they planned it out so that Boston and the meetings that were happening at the Old South Meeting House couldn't be blamed for what happened. And that's what the disguises are kind of supposed to signify. Oh, these are mysterious outsiders who are doing this. It's not us. But it's also clear that they spontaneously brought a bunch of guys that they knew on board. They're like, oh, hey, this is a big job. We've got this core group of guys that are going to do this, but we know you're our brother-in-law or something. Come join us. Or, oh, you're one of our apprentices. So this was one of the funniest things about the Boston Tea Party, is that the tide is out when it's happening. So they're dumping all this tea into the harbor, and then it starts piling up above the water line. So they have to ask a bunch of apprentices, these young boys. They're like, hey, could you row out in a boat and kind of take some oars and slap down this pile of tea that's piling up in the harbor so that it floats away? So there's this role that they have for guys. These young apprentices were probably not told in advance that this was going to happen, but they were connected to guys who were better connected than them, and that was kind of how it worked. So there's definitely elements of spontaneity, but I think there's no way that the thing just happens like that. I think they had to have, this was a contingency that they had to plan for, and they're backed into having to destroy all of this valuable tea, and so that's what they do.